Okay, well, my name is Tyler Ng. I just wanted to, I'm one of the board members here at Timothy. Just wanted to welcome you to our school and this breakout session. We're so glad you're here. I get the pleasure to introduce our speaker here for the morning session. If you're not familiar, Alan Sclemon has dedicated his life to training Christians to thoughtfully articulate their faith and values. So prior to training Christians, Alan worked in a hospital-based physical therapy for 10 years. He trained people who could no longer walk, stand, or even sit to rebuild their strength, gain confidence, and physically achieve former levels of function. The positive reaction he received from students and coworkers propelled him to turn his full-time attention to working with physical bodies to spiritual ideas. And that transition brought him to work with Stand to Reason where he is now. Alan's work represents the best in Christian thinking and the art of conversational persuasion on challenging issues of the day like evolution, abortion, which we're going to talk about this morning, relativism, homosexuality, euthanasia, cloning, and Islam. Alan graduated from California State University, Long Beach, and holds a Master of Arts in Christian Apologetics from Viola University, if I said that right. Please join me. Welcome, Alan.
Boy, that sounded so impressive. I'm like, who is that guy? Yeah, I don't know who picked these talk descriptions, or I'm sorry, these titles. Like I get abortion and I get homosexuality, transgenderism, like all the things that are not controversial, right? Everybody is going to agree with me on it. But okay, well, let's just jump right into our content since we all got just an hour. Is that my laptop making that noise? I don't know. Okay, we'll just move on. I thought I heard it like receiving an email or something. So there's probably a lot of talk you've heard these days about the term social justice, right? That term, oftentimes when someone makes reference to social justice, they are thinking of things like homelessness, racism, human trafficking, and other kinds of social ills, which, by the way, I'm not trying to suggest that these are not important. But curiously absent from the list of social justice issues is the topic of abortion. But if what we believe about abortion is true, that abortion kills an innocent human being, then you would think that abortion should rise to the top of the social justice issue list. Why? Because in every abortion, there are two victims. The first is the woman, the mother, who is oftentimes psychologically wounded, and the second is the unborn child who is fatally wounded. And so if we claim as Christians to care about justice, right, well, we should care about mothers and their unborn children. Now, oftentimes, I'm usually giving this presentation in the United States. In the United States, Planned Parenthood is the #1 abortion provider in America. And according to their own statistics, there are 2,548 abortions occurring every single day in America. Now, in Canada, it works out to be about 280 or so abortions occurring every single day in Canada. And as probably many of you know, there are no abortion laws, either for or against, on the books in Canada. So a woman in Canada can have an abortion at any time, at any stage of the pregnancy, and for any reason. Now, though just knowing that reality is troubling enough, but let me just tell you what really upsets me even more. According to the data that we have about women having abortions, we know that 23.7% of those women who are having abortions identify themselves as Catholic. Okay, 17.3% identify themselves as mainline Protestant, and 13% identify themselves as evangelical Protestant. That means Christians are killing their own children. The most dangerous place for a baby to be in our world today is resting in her own mother's womb. And so what I want to talk to you this morning about is how to make that place safer for unborn children by making abortion unthinkable. So what I want to do is try to give you some tactics, some skills that will help you to be able to make abortion unthinkable in your spheres of influence. Now, I know many of you might feel a little skeptical about my task, and you might be thinking, Alan, how is it possible that anyone would ever change their minds on abortion? People typically are very much entrenched on one side or the other of this debate, and no one ever changes their mind. I completely disagree with that assessment. In fact, I know people change their minds because I've been involved in conversations with people who've changed their minds, and for the last 20 years, I've been training pro-life Christians to learn these tactics, and then we take them into the streets of major cities, and we have them engage people in conversations about abortion, and we've seen people change their minds even in those situations. I believe the solution to making this work is to use the right tactics. And so that's what I want to present you today, is 3 key tasks that will help you to make abortion unthinkable in your spheres of influence. All right? So here's the first one. The first task that I want you to learn how to do is to show that there is only one question to resolve in the entire abortion debate. Right? Now, let me unpack that for you. People rarely will talk about abortion. In fact, in most situations, if you get into a conversation about abortion with someone, what will happen is the conversation will naturally tangent to some other related subject, right? They'll be talking about abortion, and then all of a sudden, the conversation will go to unwantedness, or rape and incest, or choice and privacy, or financial hardship, or something else. Okay, so you're not talking about abortion anymore, you're talking about these other things. Now, if you're a normal human being, which a lot of us are here, right? You're probably thinking, how can I possibly be able to know how to communicate about abortion if I have to know all of these different topics, all of these different varied issues? Like, that's a lot of stuff to know. You know, like maybe if you wanted to know about the financial hardship that women face who get pregnant, it's like, well, what is the cost of raising a child, or these kinds of things. That may be hard to know, or the incidences of rape and incest, or choice and privacy, and all the laws that might affect that. Like, that's a lot to know. And so any pro-lifer is thinking, I don't know if I can be effective as a pro-life person if I have to know all this other stuff. Now, what I'm here to tell you is you don't. You don't have to know all this stuff. I believe that the abortion debate can be resolved by just narrowing it down to one key question. And the one key question is, what is the unborn? So remember I said the first task is to show there's only one question to resolve. I believe this is the one key question that I want you to try to steer a conversation that you're having with somebody else to resolve this one question. Now, let me give you an illustration as to how I know this is the key question. Imagine that you have a 6-year-old that lives in your house, like a 6-year-old boy. Okay, so if you're a parent, imagine you have a 6-year-old son, or if you're younger, imagine you have a 6-year-old sibling, okay, 6-year-old boy. Now imagine one day you're in the kitchen, let's just say you're doing the dishes, and you hear that 6-year-old boy come up behind you. And while your back is turned, you hear that 6-year-old boy say this, "Can I kill this?" Now, before you can answer their question, what question are you going to ask that 6-year-old? Yeah, what is it, right? So you dry your hands off, you turn around, and you notice that 6-year-old boy is holding a spider in his hands. Now, what's your answer going to be?
Yes.
Yeah, unless you're like, yeah, go ahead and kill it, right? Whatever. You take one leg, I'll take another leg, let's pull that sucker in two, right? All right, but what if you turn around and you notice that 6-year-old boy is holding the neighbor's cat? What's your answer going to be? Okay, mostly no, as I thought. Yeah, all right, it's a good sign. Okay, all right. Let me make it a little bit more obvious. Right? What if you turn around and you notice that 6-year-old boy is holding his little sister by the neck? What's your answer going to be?
No.
Exactly. Okay, this kid needs therapy. All right, like counseling immediately. Right. Now, I want you to notice something. Whether or not it's moral to kill something depends entirely upon what it is you're killing. Notice you cannot answer the question, can I kill this? Until you first answer the question, what is it? So with that in mind, I want you to memorize this key point. If it turns out that the unborn is not a human being, then no justification for abortion is necessary. However, if the unborn turns out to be a human being, just like you and me, then no justification for abortion is adequate. Right? Think about it for a moment. If you ask the question, what is the unborn? And through your assessment, through your philosophical reflection, or maybe through your scientific investigation, you discover the unborn is not a human being, well then go ahead, have the abortion. Like, what's the big deal? If abortion is no different than having your tooth pulled, or your appendix taken out, or your tonsils removed, if it's just removing a part of your body, then who cares? Go ahead, have the abortion. You don't have to give any reason or any justification to do that. However, if through your philosophical reflection or through your scientific investigation, you discover that the unborn is a human being, just like you and me, then notice there's no justification for killing an innocent human being, just like you and me. Right? So this is why I say the question, what is the unborn, is the key question that needs to be resolved. And so I want to encourage you in this first task is that if you're in a conversation, to focus the conversation, to direct the conversation back to this key question, what is the unborn? Now, it turns out that the vast majority of defenses that you will hear kind of on the street in favor of abortion, they completely sidestep this question. In fact, worse, they presume the unborn is not a human being, right? So many people say, well, women have a right to choose, right? Women should have freedom of autonomy, right? They have freedom to choose. Well, if the unborn is not a human being, then yeah, of course, right? That makes sense. Do women have a right to privacy? Well, of course. Do many poor women, they can't afford a child? Should they be forced to raise a child they can't afford? Of course not. And presuming the unborn is not a human being, these kinds of defenses make perfect sense. But I want you, just hypothetically, to imagine that the unborn was a human being, or is a human being, okay? Now think, do these defenses for abortion make sense? Like, okay, women have a right to choose. Choose to do what? To have an abortion, which is what? Well, it's killing that unborn thing. Okay. So should women have the right to choose to kill somebody? Well, no, that's ridiculous. That's right, of course it's ridiculous. Should women have a right to privacy? Well, of course, but if the unborn is a human being, just like you and me, then a woman shouldn't have the freedom to choose to kill a human being as long as she does it in the privacy of her own home, or the privacy of a medical clinic. That's ridiculous, that's right. So notice, none of these will make any sense if it turns out that the unborn is a human being. So this is why I say that's the key question. Before you can make any sense of any defense for abortion, you have to first resolve the question, what is the unborn? Answer that question, and then we can then talk about whether there's any justification for killing the unborn human being. So again, all I'm saying at this point first is, if you're involved in conversation, you want to direct your conversation to this key question, what is the unborn? Right? Now, let's just presume that they agree with you that that is the key question. They say, okay, yeah, you're right, Mr. or Mrs. Pro-Lifer, you're right, that is the key question, what is the unborn? Well, the unborn is not a human being just like you and me. You think it is? Prove it. Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about what reasons we have to think that the unborn is a human being from the moment of conception, and a human being just like you and me. All right? Let's take a look at the evidence for that. So that's going to be this, of course, the second task. Show that the unborn is a human being. Now, what I want to do is I want to turn to what I call the science of embryology. Right? And what I want to show you is that the science of embryology proves three things. Now, by the way, just as an aside here, I don't normally use the term prove or the word prove when I'm in a conversation with somebody, when I'm talking about my Christian convictions. Okay? Because prove is a very strong word. Like if someone were to ask me, Alan, can you prove that God exists? I'd say, well, I can't prove it, but I can certainly give you evidence to think that it's reasonable to believe that God exists. Can you prove, Alan, that we have a soul that is some immaterial part of who we are, that's not part of our physical body? And I'd say, well, I can't prove that, but I can give you some evidence to think that it's true. Okay? But however, when it comes to the science of embryology, I'm going to show you that it is so strong, it is so decisive, that it actually turns out that the science of embryology proves the unborn is a human being. Okay? So, number one, I'm going to show you that the science of embryology proves that the unborn is a living being, meaning it's alive. Number two, I'll show the science of embryology proves that the unborn is a distinct being, meaning it's not merely a part of the mother's body, like her appendix or her tonsils or her teeth. It's a unique individual. And then number three, I'm going to show you that the science of embryology proves that the unborn is a human type of being, meaning it's not a potential human, it's a human being. And it's not some other kind of being, like a dog being or a giraffe being or something like that. It's a human being. And so if I can show you from the science of embryology that the unborn is alive, distinct, and a human type of being, I believe that I would have been able to show you that the unborn is a human being, just like you and me, from the moment of conception. So let's take each one of those three in turn. Okay, so we'll start with the first one. Is the unborn alive? Well, this is perhaps the least controversial of those three, right? We have a tremendous amount of evidence to demonstrate that the unborn is a living being. In fact, if you're like a biologist, for example, and you're looking at something, and you're asking yourself the question, is this thing that I'm looking at, is it alive or is it not alive? Usually what you'll do is you'll try to answer three questions. You'll say, well, does it grow? Does it respond to stimuli? And does it metabolize nutrients and convert those nutrients into energy? Okay? Those are what are called the biological criteria for life. And as a biologist or a scientist, that's what you're looking for to determine, is this thing alive? Okay? Turns out the unborn does all three things. The unborn grows, it responds to stimuli, and it metabolizes nutrients and converts that nutrient into energy. So this is why almost no one, I've only had one person in 20 years ever challenge me that the unborn was not alive. Strangely enough, they were a doctor, but normally no one ever denies the unborn's alive. Okay? So, okay, yeah, the unborn is a living thing. We can all concede that. I think it's pretty obvious because it does all three things from the moment of conception. All right, but is this living thing merely a part of the mother's body, like her appendix, like her liver, like her brain, or is it a unique individual being that is separate and distinct? Now, again, the science of embryology speaks decisively to this question. And let me ask you, the audience here, can you think of any characteristics that are true about the unborn that are different from the mother? What characteristics do we know that are different between the mother and the unborn that tell us that the unborn is a unique individual being? Yes?
Blood type?
Blood type, that's right. The unborn can have a different blood type than that of the mother. That's right. Anything else?
Chromosome.
Okay, the chromosomes, right? So the DNA, the genetic signature of the unborn, is different than that of the mother. And in fact, in a court situation, your DNA can distinguish between you and somebody else, and it's sufficient enough to send someone to prison. If, like, to say we have the DNA of someone versus another person. So that's very significant, right? What else is different about the mother and the unborn?
Sometimes gender.
Gender, that's right. So the unborn could be a boy, right? So I work for an organization called Stand to Reason, and my boss, his name is Greg Kokel, he used to live in Los Angeles, and one day he was at a party where some very kind of famous people were around at this party in the Hollywood area. And he's having a conversation with some woman who was obviously pregnant. And he's talking to her, and I'm trying to remember how the conversation arose, but let me see here. I know. It turned out that she was an animal rights activist. And he asked her, he said, why are you an animal rights activist? And she said, because I believe all life is precious. And my boss said to her, oh, well, you must be then pro-life when it comes to the subject of abortion. Now, what do you think she said? Yeah, that's right. She said, oh, I can see why you may have interpreted that. The reality is I'm actually not pro-life. I'm pro-choice. She said, because after all, I believe it's my body, therefore it's my choice. That's right. So my boss said to her, can I ask you, do I have permission to ask you a personal question? She said, sure. He said, do you have a penis? She said, excuse me? He's like, do you have a penis? And she said, no. And he said, could your unborn child have a penis? And she said, yes. He said, well, then your unborn child can't be a part of your body because otherwise then you would have a penis as well. And she's like, oh. Now, I don't recommend you do this at Easter dinner with your family or whatever. But in that case, it kind of provoked her to consider, oh, yeah, wait a minute. If the unborn is just a part of my body, then I could have a male sex organ. I have 4 arms. I have 4 legs, and so on and so forth, right? So absolutely, though, yeah, the unborn could be of a different sex, different genetics, different blood type. What else?
Metabolic capacity.
Say it again?
Metabolic capacity.
Okay, metabolic capacity.
So gestational diabetes, but your kid can't have a perfectly functional pancreas.
Oh, okay, right. So yeah, you could have a problem with one of your body systems, like your metabolic, like you could have diabetes, and the unborn not, right? You know what's interesting about the connection between the mother and the unborn child is that the mother's blood system and the unborn's blood system do not connect. They come very close together, right? Like this, so that nutrients can pass from the mother's blood to the unborn, and maybe waste products can go back towards the mother. But the blood systems don't connect, so it's not like blood-to-blood connection. Now here's what's really fascinating, it turns out. If there was a problem, a developmental problem in the placenta where these 2 blood systems came very close, and if they were to connect or mix, here's what would happen. The mother's body would mount an immune response against the unborn's body. Why? Because the mother's body perceives the unborn's body as a foreign body, a different body, not part of her body. Notice her immune system does not attack her liver or her eyeballs or her bones because her immune system knows that's part of her body. But if it were to detect the presence of the unborn through the blood system, it would then send an immune response against it because it knows that's not part of my body. And of course, the mother's immune system is a politically neutral, unbiased, right, assessor of what's happening. So you can't say, well, it's just biased, it's just trying to show that it's a pro-life. No, it's completely objective. It knows this is not my body, right? The unborn's fingerprints are different than that of the mother, right? Which is another way to distinguish between one and another person. The DNA, as you mentioned, circulatory system, blood type, as you mentioned. The unborn has his own brain and central nervous system and brainwave pattern, its own gender, as we mentioned before. Here's another thing. The unborn can be conceived outside of the mother's body. You could take sperm and egg, okay, and in like a laboratory, and put sperm and egg inside a petri dish and make them come together to create a new human being. Have that human being grow there for a number of days, and then later place that human being inside the mother. That is clear evidence that the unborn is not a part of her body if it could start its journey, its existence, in a laboratory. And through what's the process when a woman carries a child of somebody else?
Surrogate.
Gosh, the coffee's just kicking in. Like I had it, but it's still not fired in my body yet. So through surrogacy today, here's what's interesting. You could have a, say like a Chinese mother carrying a Swedish child inside her, right? Through surrogacy today, a Chinese mother can be carrying a Swedish child inside her, right? Just think visually, like we're talking about 2 different ethnicities, right? how could they be the same body if they're literally two different ethnicities? So again, these are all the reasons why we know the unborn is a unique individual being, not merely part of the mother's body. Okay? So we've shown the unborn is alive. We've shown now the unborn is a unique individual being. Okay? Now the question becomes, what kind of being is this living, distinct being? Is it an elephant being? Is it a dolphin being? Is it a human being? Is it a dog being? What kind of being is it? Right? Now again, the science of embryology speaks decisively to this question. And there's two ways that we know that the unborn is a human type of being. The first is through the DNA genetic signature. In other words, if you were to take a DNA sample of the unborn and test it, it would turn out that its DNA sequence would show that it's a human type of being. And by the way, that result will come back as human 100% of the time. Now, does anyone here have access, the ability to walk up to a pregnant person and be able to take a DNA sample of the unborn? Does anyone have that ability? Like no, right? You can't, right? That's incredibly invasive, right? Mm-hmm. Even doctors would be very hesitant, or scientists would be very hesitant to stick a needle inside in order to get a tissue sample. So we can talk about that being possible, but in practicality, we can't use that as a way to prove that the unborn is a human type of being. So is there another way? The answer is yes, and it's through what's called the principle of biogenesis. Okay? Now, the principle of biogenesis says this: living things reproduce after their own kind. So what this principle tells us is that when two dogs mate, they're going to produce another what? A dog, that's right. If two giraffes mate, they'll produce another what? Giraffe, that's right. When my wife was pregnant with our first child, we wondered whether we were going to have a boy or a girl, but we didn't wonder whether we were going to have a human or not, right? In fact, when we had our second child, and that child also came out to be a human, we weren't surprised, like, wow, 2 humans in a row. Wow, what are the chances? Like, that's amazing, you know? We weren't surprised by that. Because we knew, because we're human, that our offspring would also be human. So this principle provides us a very practical test. If you want to know what kind of being is the unborn, all you have to do is ask a very simple question. And that question is, what are its parents? If the parents are human, then the thing that's created as a result of it will always be human as well. It is a scientific impossibility for 2 humans to come together to produce something that is not human, but then later becomes one. That is just scientifically impossible. And so this is why the principle of biogenesis tells us that the unborn is a human type of being. Now, what we've now done then is shown from the science of embryology that the unborn is a living being, it's a distinct being, and it's a human kind of being. Okay? And this is why we can conclude that the unborn is a human being just like you and me from the moment of conception. Because all these 3 things are true from the moment that unborn human is conceived. Okay? Now, many years ago, Kathy Ireland, who was an actress, she was a supermodel for many years. She was also an actress. After she retired from acting and being a model, she became a businesswoman. She has this whole business, whatever, venture. Now, it turned out that Kathy Ireland eventually became a pro-life Christian. And because she was famous already, she was invited on a number of television shows in the United States. And one of the shows that she was going to be invited on was a show called Hannity and Colmes. Now, Hannity and Colmes is an old TV show. It doesn't exist anymore because it basically featured 2 guys, one guy named Alan Colmes and another guy named Sean Hannity. Now, Alan Colmes has since passed away, but I think Sean Hannity still has some TV show. But basically, it's like a liberal, conservative talk show where Alan Colmes is a liberal, Sean Hannity is a conservative, and they discuss topics, political topics or whatever, from both perspectives. And so one day they were going to invite Kathy Ireland onto their show, and this is a national television show in the United States. They were going to invite her on the show because she wrote a book called Powerful Inspirations. And one of the chapters in her book is about abortion. And she argues that abortion is wrong. So she was invited on the show. Before she went on the show, she came to us at Stand to Reason, and we trained her in exactly the same techniques that I just gave you an overview of. And then she took what we taught her, and then she used it on the show. And I'll show you a video of her on the show using this exact material on Kennedy Combs. Let's take a look.
Yes, now, Kathy Ireland, author of the new book, Powerful Inspirations, 8 Lessons That'll Change Your Life. Kathy, welcome to Kennedy Combs. What do you think about doing a political show like this?
Oh, I think it's great. I love you guys. Thank you for having me.
Do you watch our show?
It's great. I do.
Gee, I wonder which side you agree with. Now, I'm guessing you're pretty conservative, but you were telling me off the air you have a very strong liberal position.
You know, I don't like labels. They cause us to dismiss one another, assuming we know all there is to know. I'm conservative on some issues, and I'm
Where are
liberal
you
on
liberal?
some
Give me an
issues.
example where you're liberal.
I'm very liberal when it comes to protecting the human rights of the unborn.
All right, now, see, I'm very
Very
conservative.
well said.
I'm very
Kathy.
conservative, and I feel the government has no place in having anything to say about what women do with their bodies concerning that.
Is
So I've got a
it
conservative
her
position on
body?
that.
Is it her? I didn't want
Yes.
to be pro-choice. But when you ask powerful questions, you get powerful answers. That's one of the chapters in the book, Powerful Answers.
Right.
And the evidence I see tells me that the unborn is a human being. If you can show me any evidence that the unborn is not
Yes,
a
but
human
when
being,
does it become? We're not going to settle this here tonight, I don't think. But
Oh.
I mean, is it a conception? Is that what it
at the
happens?
moment of
Yes.
conception, at the moment of conception, a new
That's-
life comes into being
that's
with
not-
the complete genetic blueprints. The fingerprint is determined, the blood type is determined, the sex is determined.
So you would
What kind of
keep
life
going.
is
You
it?
would deny.
According to
you
the
would
law of
deny women-
biogenesis.
You would deny women the right to then choose
I
what
will
to do at
always
that
fight
point.
for women's rights. I've been an
But
activist
she
in women's
doesn't
rights, and I
have the
will
right to
continue to
choose
be.
what to do with her body.
It's
but
not
she's
her body. The baby this woman is carrying could very well have a different blood type than her. If it's a male child, the baby has a
Well.
penis. The woman doesn't have a penis, so it's not a part of her body, but it
I know
resides
it as
within
well
her
just on
body.
this issue. We're not going to. People are not going to come to agreement on this all of a sudden on this very
Checkmate.
divisive issue.
And I'm sad that it's
However,
a
let me
political
ask you.
issue.
He's so interruptive.
Yeah, so unfortunately, yeah, if you look at talk shows, say like 30 years ago, people used to actually just ask a question and then wait for the person to answer it, right? I mean, that's unfortunately, we don't live in that world anymore, sadly. But anyways, the point being is, notice, Kathy Ireland just presented the basic facts of the science of embryology, right? Did Alan Combs have any response to show that any of her evidence was mistaken? No. Because there is none. I mean, I'm not saying people can't raise objections, but there's nothing to refute the evidence that the science of embryology shows that the unborn is a human being from the moment of conception, and it's a human being just like you and me. In fact, standard embryology textbooks that are used in medical schools today will all affirm this very point. So Essentials of Embryology says this. This zygote, and by the way, the word zygote is just a reference to when a sperm and egg meet, the first stage of development is called zygote, okay? So at conception, the union of an oocyte, which means egg, and sperm is the beginning of a new human being. Notice this medical textbook does not deny that's the reality. Here's another one, Human Embryology and Teratology. It says, a new genetically distinct human organism is formed when the chromosomes of the male and female pronuclei blend in the oocyte or blend in the egg. Okay? Again, fully affirming that that's the case. Christopher Huck from the Mayo Clinic says, when fertilization is complete, a unique genetic human entity exists. Right? David Boonin, who, by the way, is a philosopher who defends abortion. In fact, he's probably one of the top American philosophers who defends abortion. And in his book, A Defense for Abortion, okay, listen to what he says. A human fetus, after all, is simply a human being at a very early stage in his or her development. Okay. Peter Singer, perhaps the most famous Australian bioethicist in the world. He's a professor at Princeton University. He's an animal rights activist, and he's a die-hard abortion rights activist. In fact, This guy not only thinks abortion is permissible, he thinks it's morally permissible to kill born children for up to a month or so after they're born if they have some sort of developmental handicap, and it brings more happiness to the parents to kill their born child and then conceive of a new child that has no developmental handicap. He says it's permissible to do that. But even this guy, as radical as he is, still says there is no doubt that from the first moments of existence, an embryo conceived from human sperm and eggs is a human being. I'm telling you, nobody who has knowledge in this area denies that the unborn is a human being. Now, I want to show you a video that will allow your eyes to confirm what your mind has just learned. That is the unborn is a human being. Now, this is called an embryoscopy, and it's not like an ultrasound. We've probably all seen an ultrasound of a baby where it's like this black and white. It's kind of like a scratchy, grainy kind of looking thing. This is where they take a device that has a camera and a little flashlight, and they insert it in the amniotic sac to see the unborn there. So this is an embryoscopy that's occurring at 9 weeks gestation. Just 9, so like just 2 months or so. So a woman may have just discovered that she's pregnant, and when she does, this is what the unborn looks like inside her. It's amazing, just 2 months or so after a woman is pregnant, this is what the unborn floating inside her looks like. You see clearly a head. I mean, you obviously recognize the kinship that's identified between the person there and the person that you are, right? It's like it's a little you, right? Again, I'm not trying to say, oh, well, emotionally or visually, this is like a substitute for an argument. No, we have a scientific argument that the unborn is a human being. But just visually as well, we can affirm, man, that definitely looks like a human being. Now, in that video, the child that was being filmed was not harmed by the procedure that took place. But in a few minutes, I'm going to show you another video where the child does not survive the medical procedure that takes place. And in that video, I'm going to show you the after effects of abortion. In other words, I'm going to show you what abortion does to the unborn. Now, that video is incredibly graphic and extremely disgusting, and it's horrific. Obviously, a lot of people object to the showing of such videos. Of course, no doubt, even abortion choice advocates are very upset when we show these kinds of videos. But I want you to see what Naomi Wolf, one of the most well-known abortion rights defenders in the United States, and an attorney who's been involved in defending abortion. Listen to what she says about the use of pro-lifers using these kinds of graphic videos. She says this: how can we charge that it's vile and repulsive for pro-lifers to brandish vile and repulsive images if the images are real? To insist that truth is in poor taste, well, that's the very height of hypocrisy. Besides, if these images are often the facts of the matter, and if we then claim that it's offensive for pro-choice women to be confronted by them, then we are making a judgment that women are too inherently weak to face a truth about which they have to make a grave decision. This view is unworthy of feminism. So even Naomi Wolf, a die-hard abortion rights activist, a feminist, a person who's prosecuted cases involving abortion, she says, look, no, it's totally legitimate. Like, if what we're showing is real, and we are because we got this footage from physicians who perform abortions, they're the ones who gave us this footage. It's not like we invented it. This is before AI, before Midjourney was an image created to create fake images. This is what we had, video cameras showing what an abortion procedure does. So in a minute, I'm going to show you a 60-second video clip of the after effects of abortion. And what you'll see is different human beings at different stages of development when they have been aborted. Okay? Now, as I said before, this footage is extremely graphic and it's horrific to look at. It's the worst thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And although I do want you to see it, I don't want you to feel forced to watch it. And so if you don't want to watch it, that's fine. You have a lot of options available to you. You can just simply close your eyes for 60 seconds. There's no narration, so you won't hear what's being shown, right? There's some instrumental music and that's it. Just look away, close your eyes. Either way, you're fine. I'm not going to be upset if you don't want to see it. Okay? But I will say it is extremely disturbing. Now, I'll also add that it's quite possible that someone here has had an abortion themselves. Right? And I want you to know every single person in this room and at this conference and in this world is guilty of crimes that we have committed against God. And there is not one person on earth that stands blameless before God. Every single one of us is condemned and deserving of judgment. Thankfully, though, God is willing to offer a pardon for the crimes that we committed. And even the sin of abortion is not beyond the grace of God. So if that's where you are today, I encourage you to turn to Him, because this is not the unforgivable sin in any sense. Okay, having said that, let's look at the video. Again, 60 seconds. If you don't want to see it, it's fine. Just close your eyes. And then once the music's over, you'll know that the video footage is over. But this is an opportunity for the victims to testify on their own behalf. One pro-life leader said, if something is so horrifying that we can't stand to look at it, perhaps we shouldn't be tolerating it. And you might be asking, well, why is it that anyone would do that to their unborn child? Canada, 284 times in just this day. In the United States, 2,584 times in just today. Well, actually, there's a lot of abortion providers who have asked questions of women who come in to have an abortion. Why are you about to do what we just saw? And here's what women have said when they've come in to have an abortion. 25% say they are not ready for another child, or the timing for them is wrong. Some said, I can't afford a baby now. That's composed about 23%. Here they said, I've completed my childbearing and I have other people depending on me, or my children are already grown. That's 19%. I don't want to be a single mother, or I'm having relationships problems. That's 8%. I don't feel mature enough to raise another child, or I feel too young. That's 7%. It would interfere with my education or my career. That's 4%. If you add up just those, that comprises that 86% of the abortions that are occurring for socio-economic reasons. Now, you'll see physical problems with my health and possible problems affecting the health of the fetus accounts for another 7%. If you read the study, which was discovered, none of those are life-threatening conditions. Every single one of them are reversible or treatable conditions. In other words, if you add that 7%, that's another 90, so it's 93% of abortions are occurring for reasons that do not involve what you're most likely to hear: rape, incest, life of the mother, or anything like that. Okay. So, we've answered, or we've shown the second task, which is to show that the unborn is a human being. So remember, the first task is to show that there's only one question to resolve. And what's that one question? What's the one key question to resolve? Yeah, what is the unborn? And then the second task is to answer that question to show that the unborn is a human being from the moment of conception. And now the third task is to show that all human beings are valuable. Because you might be asking, well, wait a minute, all those medical textbooks, all those defenders of abortion, they're all saying the unborn is a human being, but yet they still think abortion should be morally permissible. How is that the case? Well, I'll show you. So this is the logic of the pro-life view. This is the logic of what I would argue is my view, or the pro-life view. So it's composed of two premises and a conclusion. So premise one is this: it's wrong to kill an innocent human being. Premise two is abortion kills an innocent human being. And the conclusion that would logically follow is, therefore, abortion is wrong. Now, if you're into logic or philosophy, you'll recognize this. It's called a valid deductive argument, which means if premise one is true, and if premise two is true, then this conclusion logically follows by necessity. The conclusion must be true if premise one and premise two are true. Now, which premise do you think is more controversial, premise one or premise two? Which premise do you think most people will reject? Two, that's right. Most people will accept premise one, that it's wrong to kill an innocent human being. And if they don't accept that, chances are no argument's going to convince them. They probably need a jail cell, right? If they think it's okay to kill innocent human beings, you got other issues. Okay? So you're right, most people will accept premise one as true. It's premise two that needs to be shown to be true. But we just walked through the scientific evidence from the science of embryology that the unborn is a human being, just like you and me, from the moment of conception. And since abortion kills whatever that thing is, we've now shown then that abortion does kill an innocent human being. So therefore, guess what? Abortion's wrong. This conclusion is true. Now, here's how abortion choice advocates get around this. Because they realize, okay, our position's in a heap of trouble because this makes total sense. So here's how they get around it. Many years ago, I debated a feminist. She's a women's studies professor at a university in California, and we had a debate on abortion. And this is the move that she and many other people make. This is what they say. They say, no, it's not wrong to kill innocent human beings. It's wrong to kill innocent human persons. Abortion, yeah, it kills an innocent human being, but it doesn't kill a person. So therefore, abortion is not wrong. So notice what they're trying to argue. The unborn might be a human being, but it's not a person. Now, anytime someone makes that type of claim, what question pops into your mind automatically? What's that?
What's a person?
Yeah, what's a person? Or what's the difference? What's the difference between a human being and a human person? Right? Now, they must have an answer to that question because they have just made an incredible claim. They've just made the claim that the unborn might be a human being, but it's not a person. that there exists a group of human beings out here in the world that are not persons. And we can kill those human beings with impunity. Really? Who are these human beings that are not persons that we can just kill? Like maybe that might be a good sport. Instead of hunting deer, hunt human beings who aren't persons. Like, I don't know. Like, that's kind of weird. Well, they'll give you an answer. And the answer usually amounts to a number of different characteristics that they believe distinguish between a human being and a human person. All the characteristics that you will find that they give to say is the difference between a human being and a human person fall under one of these four categories. Okay? It's either going to be size, or it's going to be related to the level of development, or environment, or degree of dependency. And you can remember these four categories because they form the acronym SLED. And this is what we call the SLED test. So in other words, what I want to say is this. Yes, it's true that the unborn, it is different than a born person. No question about that. The unborn and the born human beings, they are clearly different. No one denies that. And they're different in these four ways. But what I'm about to show you is that none of these four ways is relevant to the question of what makes someone viable. None of these four characteristics or categories disqualifies the unborn from being a valuable person. Okay? Let's take a look at each one. So let's take a look at size first. Okay, it is true. Yes, the unborn is smaller than a born human being. Nobody denies that. But what does size have to do with your status as a human being? Why does size somehow disqualify? Why does your small size disqualify you from being a person or being valuable? Many years ago, the Guinness Book of World Records brought together the tallest person on earth and the shortest person on earth. Sultan Kozan, he's a Turkish man, 8 feet 3 inches tall, right? Little Chandra Dengi, 1 foot, 8.5 inches, cute little guy, right? I mean, you can pump that guy. I mean, you wouldn't, because that'd be dehumanizing. But I'm just saying, he is so small. Now, does the fact that Sultan is much larger than Chandra mean that Sultan is more valuable than Chandra? Is he more of a person than Chandra because he's bigger? Anyone? No. Size is irrelevant when it comes to your status as a person. And since we don't disqualify Chandra from being less valuable because he's smaller, in the same way the unborn just happens to be smaller than Chandra. So we can't disqualify the unborn for being smaller for the same reason we don't disqualify Chandra for being smaller. So size is irrelevant when it comes to your status as a person. Okay, what about the L in the SLED test? That stands for level of development. By the way, this is my son when he was just a few months old. So cute, right? Now he's 18. Okay, you can imagine the difference, right? Things come out of his mouth that I wish I'd never heard. No, I still love the kid, okay? But yes, it's true. The unborn absolutely is less developed than a born human being. No question about that. But why is being less developed somehow disqualify you from being a valuable human being? I mean, my daughter, when she was just 6 years old, she didn't have her reproductive system fully developed. She was less developed than many of the women in this room. You know, many of the women in this room have your reproductive system developed to the point where you could potentially get pregnant and bear a child, right? But when my daughter was 6, she didn't have the capacity because she was less developed. Could we say at that point, I mean, she's 16 now, but can we say that at that point she's less of a person or less valuable than the women here who can get pregnant?
No.
No, because your level of development doesn't mean that you're more of a person, or it doesn't disqualify you if you're not as developed as somebody else. In the same way, the unborn just happens to be less developed than a 6-year-old, like my daughter was at that time. So just because you're less developed, it shouldn't disqualify you from being valuable, from being a person. So notice the L in SLED test also not relevant to the question of being a person. What about the E in the SLED test? Yes, it's true that the unborn is in a different environment, in a different location than a born human being. But where you are has no bearing on who you are, right? I mean, when someone floats in space with a spacesuit, or they swim underwater with scuba gear, They're in a different environment, they're in a different location. By the way, both of those locations, you as a human are not viable without the aid of help. And yet, notice, we don't disqualify anyone from being less of a person or being less valuable simply because they're in a different location. And a location where they're not viable without help. Why? Because where you are has no bearing on who you are. Well, if that's the case, how can a 6-inch journey down the birth canal magically transform a non-viable human being into a viable person? Like, nothing has changed except location. They're here and then they're outside of here. Same being, just a different location. So clearly just being inside somebody can't disqualify you from being a person because you are literally physically the same exact thing. So notice, the E in SLUT test also, it's not relevant when it comes to your status as a person. And then finally, the D in the SLUT test stands for degree of dependency. Yes, it's true. The unborn, yes, absolutely is more dependent upon the mother for survival. But I ask you, why is being dependent upon someone else all of a sudden disqualify you from being a person or being viable? All kinds of people are dependent upon others today for their survival, right? Elderly people are dependent upon their adult children for survival. A lot of people are on certain machines that they need to survive for a time, right? You know, after a child is born, by the way, are they still dependent upon their parents?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely they are. In fact, it was a lot easier when my kids were inside my wife because then we could still go to the movie and hang out, do whatever we want. But now that they're out, it's like, well, you can't take them to the movie. You can't leave them at home by themselves. So they're still dependent, right? And when they're 5 years old, they're still dependent. In fact, many of you teenagers are still probably dependent upon your parents for just kidding. Some of you husbands are still dependent upon your wife. Right, so notice, being dependent upon someone else cannot disqualify you from being viable. Imagine you're at a pool party at someone's house, and everyone's going to go inside to have lunch, to have some pizza. You're the last person to leave the pool area, and as you're about to walk in, you hear a splash. You turn around and you see that a little infant has just fallen into the deep end of a pool. Can you say, well, you are now dependent upon me for your survival, so you don't qualify as valuable? I mean, that's ridiculous, right? Because being dependent upon someone else does not affect your status as a person. In the same way, the unborn, just because they're dependent upon their mothers for survival, before and after birth, should not disqualify them from being valuable either. So notice then, there are only 4 ways in which the unborn differs from a born human being, and none of those 4 ways justifies disqualifying the unborn from being viable. Right? None of those 4 ways is justification to kill the unborn, but not the born person. Yes, they're different, but those differences are not morally significant. That's my point. So then what is abortion? Really, abortion comes down to a form of unjust discrimination. Right? Why? Because you are basically taking a class of human beings and disqualifying them from being valuable and killing them. Think about it. Our human history is crowded with examples where a class of human beings has been disqualified from being valuable based on an arbitrary characteristic. So think about it for a moment. In the United States, we had discrimination against African Americans, right? Notice, they were a class of human beings, but they were disqualified from being valuable based on a characteristic that was completely arbitrary. What characteristic? Their skin color. Why? So they could be kidnapped and enslaved. In the World War II, we saw discrimination against the Jews. Notice, they were also a class of human beings that was disqualified from being valuable based on a characteristic that was completely arbitrary. What characteristic? Their ethnicity. Why? So they could be experimented on and exterminated. And today, unborn children are being discriminated against in exactly the same way. Notice, they are a class of human beings. Nobody denies they're not human. They're a class of human beings, but they're being disqualified from being valuable based on a characteristic that is completely arbitrary. What characteristic? They're too small, they're not developed enough, they're in the wrong location, or they're too dependent upon their mothers for survival. Why? Well, for the reasons that you saw women give for having an abortion. So this is why I say abortion is simply a form of unjust discrimination. Our view, the pro-life view, is not discriminatory at all. In fact, the pro-life view is the inclusive view. The pro-life view is a view that is inclusive of all human beings, right? Our view is that no human being, regardless of their size, their level of development, their race, their gender, or their place of residence, should be excluded from the human community. Our view of humanity is inclusive and wide open to all, especially to those who are small, vulnerable, and defenseless. What's crazy is, it's this language that our society today is always like, you Christians, you discriminate, right? You're not inclusive, you're exclusive. It's like, wait a minute, no. We are the inclusive ones, because we're including all human beings in the community of humanity, whereas other people are disqualified. Okay, we have to break for lunch in a minute. I just want you to know, if you are interested in getting the kind of training that I just described to you now sent to you for free, use this QR code to sign up for something called Solid Ground. This is a free training that we either mail out or email, depending on how you subscribe to it when you go to that URL. And it's like free training every 2 months. My boss, Greg Kokel, we mail out a thing either on like the resurrection of Jesus, or on preferred pronouns, or how do you lovingly engage your friend or family member who's LGBT, which, by the way, I'll be talking about in the main session 4 or 3, or last session. But these are the kind of things that we talk about in Solid Ground. If you want to get that for free, just put your phone up to that QR code, and it'll take you to a place where you can sign up for it. Otherwise, go to lunch. I'll hang around here. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them for you. Thank you so much. Tyler, did you want to say anything?
No, let's thank Alan.
Okay.